You're listening to the Underscore Transformation Podcast, your practical guide to business transformation.
Welcome to the Underscore Transformation Podcast. This is episode 12. My name's Jason West.
And I'm Joe Wales.
And together we're the founders of Underscore. This week's episode, I'm talking to Shafique Barabhuiya. Shafique is a finance transformation consultant with experience across multiple organizations and different industries. He's a fascinating individual. He's got a lot of interesting points and experience to share, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome, Shafique. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
I understand that your background is in finance, and it would be really great if you could give our listeners a brief overview of your experience.
Yeah, so as you already articulated, I'm sort of a finance transformation specialist. I started out my career in finance roles in tech and telco. I did a brief stint in sort of private equity, running a couple of startups. And also doing some fund administration, then moved to Deloitte for my sins in the CFO advisory practice there, working with telco, tech, retail, pharma clients on a sort of range of transformation challenges, end-to-end implementation, and a lot of sort of upfront sort of scoping, strategy, operational strategy, target operating model design.
So kind of a real breadth and depth of experience. And on our last live session, we actually didn't have anyone from a finance background. So I'm really fascinated to understand kind of your perspective of, hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at our transformation scoping checklist. Just how much of this is kind of really transferable to the finance side of transformation?
Yeah, I mean, it's all transferable, really. I mean, typically, in a lot of organizations, the CFO is, the close number two to the CEO. And in a lot of organizations, the sort of succession plan up to CEO typically a lot of the time goes through the CFO. So you are right in the heart of the organization and the decision making, and the CFO's agenda is typically very high up on the CEO's agenda as well.
So a good place to start then is really, as we think about scoping a program, what we've seen as one of the critical success factors is the program sponsorship that really drives the program. So I'd be fascinated to hear your views and experience of working with program sponsors. What kind of works? What are the things that really makes an effective program sponsor, and what are some of those things perhaps people should look out for if they're sponsoring a transformation program for the first time?
I think the critical thing in terms of being a sponsor of a program is to really be a strong advocate for what the program is looking to do, because very often, if you're in a sort of a program leadership role delivering the program, as I typically am, what you're looking for from a sponsor is someone who can be an advocate for the program, because typically, you are putting quite a lot of change into the organization, and people's roles can change. The role of, finance, HR, whatever the function is, can change quite substantially. And you do have bumps in the road. There are people whose roles will change and they will feel uncertain, and you need the sponsor to really be vocal. So someone who can take ownership and have sometimes those difficult decisions and speak to their peers at board level or whatever level it may be to get buy-in from the rest of the organization, really, that is key from a sponsor, I think.
Yeah. What are some of the things that sponsors should look out for? So some of the behaviours or just some of the things that they might do that can be kind of problematic or a bit counterproductive when it comes to transformation?
Sometimes, I haven't seen it so much myself, but sometimes you do have sponsors who are a little bit sort of hands-off and sort of leave it to the sort of program director and the delivery team to deliver. And then that can lead to problems down the line in terms of, transferring capabilities into an organization. So typically, one failure you do see around programs sometimes is too much focus around the technology and the deliverables. Yeah. So you can have a focus on the design and then the technical go live. Whereas where you're looking for the role of a sponsor is really to be an advocate of the change in the organization. Ultimately, success is not a successful technical go live. It is a successful adoption by the business of said processes, technology, and that's where you're looking for the sponsor to be a lead there, to communicate the importance of the change to the rest of the organization. And so if you don't have that, that is a big gap in any program, I would say.
In our experience, it's definitely the number one success factor in delivering an ultimately successful transformation is the strength and the quality and the engagement of the program sponsor.
And larger the organization, the more important that is. If you are a smaller organization and you've got a smaller number of people in HR or finance, whatever it is, you could argue that achieving that change is slightly easier. But the larger the organization, the more global, etc., then the more important that becomes. So you can get away with it on smaller programs, but if anyone's listening to this and they're leading an organization, it doesn't have to be big, but if you are global, then that's critical, really.
So one of the areas that we often see as a bit of a challenge is where program teams can start rushing off and designing the future state before really understanding what the problems are that they're trying to solve. Have you found a similar challenge, and how important is it to really define problems and look for data to support the position?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point. I think understanding what problem you are trying to solve is very important. As you're suggesting, there can be a rush to sort of assume what the solution is, i.e., implementation of a system. But have you got a broader set of capabilities that you're looking at in terms of effectiveness of finance, of HR, of IT? To what extent is it a system issue? Is it a data issue? Or is it roles and responsibilities and how people are performing their roles, and how do those elements interact with the technology? And what you're looking for the technology to be is an enabler for a broader sort of business transformation and effectiveness piece, and then being having a sort of an honest assessment of to what extent a program is technology centric, because typically if you are implementing a new technology, it can provide an opportunity to reshape roles. People might be doing sort of manual workarounds around various sort of administrative parts of their role that might fall away with the new technology, and then what are you replacing that time with? And it can be an opportunity to re-engineer roles. So looking at a broader effectiveness of an organization and what people do is the point of view that I come from as well, because that's ultimately how you unlock real sort of step change in sort of capability, I think. And one of those capabilities in terms of an end state, and looking at the technology and the deliverables associated that as an enabler rather than an end in itself, I think is a good sort of state of mind and lens to have.
So really start at that holistic functional level before getting sucked into the detail. Very high level, what are those 3 or 4 or 5 bullet points of what you want to achieve? And then you can put some strategic objectives for the program around that, and then that can cascade into work streams and deliverables after that. But start at that very outset and make sure that you've got a good understanding of what the issues are that you're trying to solve. Yes, yeah.
So sometimes that could be around the future state of the organization. What are you designing for? Are you a fast-growing organization? Are you looking to acquire? Are you going to be expanding overseas? Are you going to be including new lines of business? What are the sort of changes in processes that you can see coming up as a result of that? And understanding what the problems you're solving. Are you solving for today, or are you solving for 3 years or 5 years' time? And what does that look like?
Yeah. And on that change thought, how soon in a program should people really start thinking about change management and those sorts of topics?
Change management starts right from the outset. I think right from the beginning, when you are doing that vision and strategic objectives piece, it really does start there. Who are the people who you want to be sort of inside the tent, so to speak, in terms of this future state organization, and then bringing those people on board. And by getting them signed up to the objectives of what you're trying to do, you're already bringing them along the change curve and getting their buy-in. And really it starts from the beginning. And Jason, I'm sure you would agree that a lot of organizations don't resource change management effectively, and a lot of the time don't resource it sufficiently. And then what happens is systems go live, legacy systems do not get decommissioned, and people fall back on old ways of working. And then you've spent quite a large sum of money on a piece of work, and then people still persist with the old ways of working. And a lot of that is down to change management and buy-in from people rather than a fault of technical delivery.
Yes, yeah, because often the most difficult thing is just simply getting people to stop doing what they've been doing, up to today, and getting them to start doing something different tomorrow. It's the technology tends to be relatively straightforward.
Yes. Yes, exactly. No, exactly. So it's a sort of a multi-pronged approach in terms of it could be briefing your line managers and making sure that they mention things in their team meetings. It's about having a change role on a program and coaching sponsors and their leadership teams around the change. And then it is things like potentially an intranet landing page or sending out emails. Having sort of town halls and sort of looking at that sort of communications toolbox and working out what's right for you as an organization. And I think the earlier you start that, it also helps, I think, for a program to sort of exhibit the behaviors that you want to see in the end state. So if you do want to achieve a step change in terms of finance and how it finance or HR in terms of how it partners with the business, then really as a program, you should be exhibiting those behaviors. And that means reaching out to people and communicating in the appropriate way.
Yeah, and getting the work stream leads, the process owners, the that kind of senior leadership team within the finance function or HR function that are heavily involved in delivering the program to actually go out there and engage with people and engage quite broadly across the business.
Indeed, and I think a point closely related to that is and this is more the case the larger the organization you go to, is you can't always keep everyone happy. Sometimes you will have aspects of a change where people might feel that they might be managing a large team, or they might have broader responsibility, and there might be an operating model change around how work is being outsourced or how work's being moved or centralized. And those sort of difficult conversations are what you need to have at the outset, because you need the business to be signed up.
One of the areas of pushback that we quite often get actually from leadership teams is around actually going to the business and gathering requirements. So going out to a broad sweep of people, not just within the function, but the customers of that function and the other parts of the organization, and really asking for their honest feedback, their views, and kind of getting them engaged as part of the scoping phase of the program. Do you have you experienced a similar sort of challenge, and how have you overcome it?
Actually, I don't see it as a challenge necessarily. I think a lot of if you do go to stakeholders, they view it as an opportunity, actually, because they quite welcome the fact that they are being asked in terms of what their requirements are. So it could be around, how you, from a finance perspective, it would be around how you track business performance. What are those KPIs? Yeah. And it's an opportunity to deepen that relationship with the rest of the business. So if you engage in the right way and making sure that the sessions that you have are productive, I've always seen it as being something that's welcomed, because ultimately those stakeholders, can see that they will benefit from it.
Yeah, I know. We've always found from the stakeholders in the business, they've always very much welcomed it, and they've been more than forthcoming with input and feedback. The resistance we've found has been within the function that you're trying to, or you're transforming, is that it's the senior leaders within that function that can be quite protective or concerned about going to the business and asking for their input and feedback.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. And I think part of that, I mean, every organization is different, but if you are looking at an organization, if you're talking about finance and HR, these are both support functions, and ultimately you are supporting the business to achieve its objectives. And being outward facing in that way is starting to exhibit those right behaviors, and it can be part of a broader sort of capability change around finance or HR, around how you manage those relationships with other stakeholders. So it's very much part of a broader sort of transformational piece. Very often those kind of conversations, because maybe before they haven't been asked.
When you're looking specifically at a finance transformation, what are the typically the really important areas that you need to kind of focus on in terms of really drilling down into particular areas to gather requirements?
I think from a finance point of view, you are the guardian of business assets and business performance. So there is a certain hygiene level around reporting and statutory requirements in various countries, and really understanding what those requirements are and making sure that you can continue to meet those requirements is absolutely sort of fundamental. So sort of one example is there was a new e-invoicing requirement in Italy, for example, that sort of came online last year. So that's one example. You need to make sure that you can carry on doing those things.
So that's kind of understanding where we are today and really kind of getting to grips with what needs to change, what some of those case for change elements may be. But if we start, looking forward into the future, when it comes to setting vision, strategic objectives, and things like design principles, what have you found works, and how do organisations best approach that kind of really defining that future vision of how finance is going to operate?
Yeah, design principles are those things. There's an old expression which I'm not particularly a big fan of, but people use it. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, and I think what we mean by that is you can start with a grand plan and a very good idea of where you want to go, but things happen on the way. Issues come up. It might be around resources. It might be around issues with data, whatever it is that cause you to make decisions along the way to keep the program on track and change scope, etc. And those design principles are those things that you refer back to make sure that you're still achieving the ultimate objectives and you keep the original intention in mind. So I guess it's a set of value statements that you can keep referring back to and keeping everyone honest. And almost when you are looking at, signing off various stages of the program, making sure that you're still holding true to those issues, because you may have to make fundamental changes in terms of scope, managing quality, cost and time, the old classic, and then just making sure that you're staying on track.
So is there an ideal number of design principles that people should use?
What you're looking for from design principles is to provide a linkage from strategic objectives through to what you're trying to achieve. So, you can have design principles around, how much costs that you want to take out of the business, particular changes around process, how you want to use data, the kind of reporting that you want, whatever it is. And then you can link deliverables and outcomes of the program to those design principles. And it's however many you need. I've seen programs with 2 or 3. I've actually seen programs that have had 7 or 8 or 10. I think it's whatever is right for you. And you can go into sort of varying levels of details. You can keep it quite high level, but I've also seen programs where they've gone into quite a lot of detail, and that's actually worked quite well.
Yeah, that must really help when people are kind of stuck in a particular, with a particular design problem. To have that guidance must be really quite useful.
Yes. So, for example, I've seen, just to give a tangible example, I've seen design principles around, for example, how people want a treasury management process to work. And that's quite informative to the program because, in this instance, it was a CFO, had quite a strong point of view based on his prior experience around how that process should run. So it was very instructive to the program to have that level of detail in a design principle. And therefore, when you are looking at making design decisions throughout a program, it helps the program team to make decisions and not have a bottleneck around decision making as well. So it can perform a number of roles, having good design principles.
Yeah. And how soon should people start thinking about their vision?
The vision piece very much sort of happens up front because that's the point at which you're shaping the program and what you're looking to deliver. And I think the earlier you start that, the better, really. And it really is an opportunity, as we were talking about in one of the other questions around speaking to external stakeholders and customers of the function, and really trying to sort of understand where you want to place the emphasis, because you might start out with a certain emphasis and then you realize, actually, we're unlocking X, Y, and Z, and does it present opportunities elsewhere? And to what extent do you want to sort of also include those elements, and what are the dependencies as well? So very much starting that right at the outset, I think is key.
Yeah. So that whole kind of vision, strategic objectives, design principles, they really do help guide decision-making on the program. And when we think about that decision-making piece, it kind of brings us naturally on to governance. And what in your experience kind of really works from a governance perspective, especially on the larger programs? What are those key elements that a governance structure needs in it?
I think in terms of governance, the first element is sort of how you go about planning. And particularly on sort of large programs with your sort of, large global corporates, you can't centralize too much planning. I think at a central level, you need to sort of keep your milestones and understand where you are against each of those milestones. But you are looking for each sort of work stream really to, have their own day by day, task by task kind of plan. And where I've seen programs kind of fall down is where you do need to make sure that all the work stream leads have that sort of planning capability, and you do have to bring everyone up to the same sort of level in terms of what you're looking for. Particularly if there are people in the program who maybe have BAU roles, who maybe haven't been on transformation programs before, who may not necessarily understand the value of that planning piece. I think that's quite critical at the outset.
In terms of that kind of that program management or project planning capability, how have you gone about kind of making sure that the workstream leads can kind of do what they need to do in their new roles? Because it's something that's a challenge on every program.
Yes, there are various ways to sort of look at that. I think, as I was mentioning before, you do need each work stream to have a good view of what their day-by-day plan is and who is doing what. And therefore, out of that, you can then understand what the resource requirements are. You can support it centrally and have sort of PMO analysts who can support that. But ultimately, you are looking for, you do need a strong sort of planning capability that is pervasive throughout the program. It isn't something that you just write, that's a planning team, they do the plan and everyone else does the work. It doesn't need to be quite pervasive, because you do have to make people accountable in the program for delivering their bit. And part of that is understanding their plan. So I think my one bit of advice would be, yes, you need an overall plan, but everyone in the program needs to play their part.
So don't try and run a transformation program with one big plan in MS Project or Primavera or whatever you use.
Yeah, exactly. And I have been in programs where the ask has been, can we produce a big plan? And then you spend literally weeks, if not months, on that plan. And it's just updated for its own sake. And then in the end, work streams end up working on their own plans so that they can have something that's workable.
It becomes an industry in and of itself. This monster that you've built just needs constant
Exactly. Yeah. And then you have meetings that are just about updating the plan, which in itself has no value, right? So you have to be careful that you're not creating unnecessary.
And when we think about that, sort of that frequency of various governance meetings, what do you find works at the various levels of governance in a program?
I think at the workstream level, particularly if you're deploying sort of cloud-based technology, you can have daily stand-ups with your team. When I've run work streams, having a daily stand-up and saying, right, what's everyone working on? What did they do yesterday? What are they looking at today? What are the things that you need? And then you're asking for information from your team members. What are the things that you need support on or help on? That's at a daily level. I think overall sort of, work stream, if you are managing a team or a small project, you want something minimum monthly, if not weekly. And then in terms of steerco, I think in terms of steering committees for an overall program, I think very often it can depend on sort of how compressed your timescales are. So, I mean, I've seen programs that are operating to quite aggressive timelines. And I've seen at certain periods of the program, you might want to run those steercos on a weekly basis. You might have, a really sort of urgent red flag issue that is really on the critical path, and you may want to get sort of weekly updates on that issue, and therefore you have steercos on that. Equally, if a program is going well, and you have confidence around how it's delivering, and you've got a cadence where things are going smoothly, you can reduce the frequency of that governance. Steering committees, because of the accountability, it does create a lot of work sometimes. And I think getting that balance right is important, because what you don't want to do is get everyone spending half their time worrying about the governance as well as delivering the program, and sort of getting that balance right is important. But it's very much on a sort of case-by-case basis, I would say.
Yes, no, it also depends on the amount of risk, obviously, and which you touched on there. I've certainly had an experience of a program where we were meeting at least weekly at one stage, because we were migrating a large number of suppliers from one master vendor to another, and there was a lot of commercial risk around that. There were millions at stake, and the COO, the CFO, and the CHRO wanted to be updated. It was literally twice a week at one point because we were in really quite dicey commercial negotiations.
I had a very similar experience, and I had something similar where we had a data issue and it was involving an external vendor, and we had weekly steercos. But then at the end of each day, there was an update to the members of that steering committee as well on that.
Wow, daily.
On that one issue.
On that one topic.
But on the other hand, I have seen it the other way around where we were doing an implementation of an ERP and we selected a vendor. And you start out planning for the worst. You think, we have to keep on top of it, making sure the issues don't come up. And in the end, the vendor was actually really superb. They had a great team. Mm-hmm. And the steercos, they really came down in frequency because it was going pretty smoothly, actually. They had experience, with their competitors in the same industry, using the same technology, and they had a lot of, material that they could reuse, and it went very smoothly. So very much judge it on its own merits.
Yeah. So in that kind of what you're describing almost as a best case scenario on a transformation program, how often did they drop their frequency to? What was it, monthly or
monthly? We dropped it to monthly. I think monthly is probably a minimum.
Yeah.
I would suggest because you do need to keep some accountability. I think minimum is sort of monthly, and then make sure you have a sort of a standing agenda in terms of progress, and then have updates around specific issues. So going back to the point around design principles, you might want to you could structure it around design principles and say if a program is going smoothly, then maybe having, on each steerco, you could have a focus on some of the topics within that program that align with those design principles.
Yes. Yeah. Adherence to any variation.
Yes. So if there are any variations that have been made, it's an opportunity to get on the front foot with some of those things.
I really like the idea of having where if you've got that breathing space, really focusing on those design principles and making that a kind of a key topic on the monthly steerco meetings. That's a really interesting approach.
This podcast is brought to you by Underscore, the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit underscore-group.com.
So as we move on and we start thinking about how we're going to manage this behemoth of a program or a portfolio, there's a wealth of different methodologies out there. There's MSP, IPMA. There's lots and lots of different kind of tool sets, really, or methodologies for managing different levels of project, program, and portfolio. What have you found to be the most effective? When you think about those different methodologies, do you have a preference, or what kind of works?
I think the starting point for me is around making sure that everyone is clear what the plan is, what the milestones are, what the deliverables are, and then getting to the level of understanding in a plan where you know who is doing what when, so that you're confident you've got the bandwidth within the team to do it. That's a good starting point. So at a program level, making sure that you've understood what each of the work streams are doing and the milestones, and crucially the interdependencies between them. So understanding, who needs what from what part of the program. That is something that you need to sort of manage centrally.
Yes, yeah.
I think, and particularly where there are dependencies into other programs, or you are dependent on things from other parts of the organization, understanding what those external dependencies are is critical, because what you're looking to do as a program leadership is to manage those issues. Typically, you are competing for resource. Your transformation is not the only game in town.
Yes.
There are other things going on. There are other calls on people's time in terms of BAU, and what you need to be able to do is to articulate to your sponsor and external stakeholders what you're trying to do and whose time you need. I think that's critical. Taking a slightly different emphasis, I think the ways of working are important as well.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're managing a global team and thinking about how you can use collaboration tools. So, Microsoft Teams is relatively new, and that has got quite rich functionality. You can do sort of group chats, but you can sort of have documents that everyone updates, and it can be in some cases a more effective way of working than just sort of emailing documents or using SharePoint, for example. So looking at collaboration tools and thinking at the outset, designing for that and sort of saying and having some guidelines around that to say, you might want to say, for example, where possible, we will have, Microsoft Teams and, or kind of whatever it is, thinking about what the tools you're going to use to manage the program is important as well, because it sounds a bit dry and not that important, but actually some focus on it can greatly improve the effectiveness of the program in terms of the basics.
And when we, I was thinking, on global programs, I've definitely been on the receiving end of some interesting behaviours when it comes to kind of setting up those regular weekly calls or monthly meetings. Is that it's so easy if you're sat in one time zone to just go, oh, we're going to meet at 12 midday every week. And I've always made a real point on any program, a global program that I'm running, is to share the pain. It's just not possible to get everybody on the same call at the same time and for it to be within working hours. But generally, it tends to be Australia that gets hit worst on these programs. I
agree. I was just going to say that, actually. And I think one of the things that it's easy to do, clearly, we are UK based. So I guess we tend to run UK based programs predominantly. And a behavior that you want to watch is that you're not always asking Asia or Australia to dial in late. Sometimes doing things to their time scale. You have to manage, the greater the time zone difference, the more sensitively you need to sort of manage situations, and constantly asking teams to dial in at sort of 6 a.m., 7 a.m. or 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Or worse, yeah.
As you're going to sort of work people quite hard. And when it gets to the end of a program, people will be sort of, physically and emotionally a bit exhausted. So watching out for that. I absolutely agree, Jason.
Right at the point where you need them to be out there, as ambassadors, selling the vision and this new way of working and, walking the talk and doing all that great stuff that's going to engage and motivate people, you've just burnt them out over the course of the past 8-9 months, and they're not going to thank you for it, are they?
No.
We've talked about methodology, but now if we kind of focus on the people element of it when we're looking at kind of program and project management, so specifically about the capabilities that you need to be effective in these different roles, and there is a difference between being an effective project manager and an effective program manager. So I'd be keen to understand from your perspective, what does a good project manager look like? Well, what are the kind of key attributes of a good project manager?
A good project manager has a good handle on the detail, is able to build a plan that focuses on what the tasks are that need to be completed on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. The deliverables that have been agreed to with the program, making sure that all the members in the project team understand what their role is and is able to, run a work stream or a project with a cadence that tracks against that and is able to, effectively replan when things come up. So you're very much focusing on those sort of outputs. I think at the program level, what you're looking for is something a bit different. You are managing conflicting resources. You are looking at the different priorities on the program and sort of balancing against those. You are managing a lot of the time, particularly in big global corporates, the external environment. And by external environment, I mean external to the program, and yes. Making your sort of sponsor aware of how the program is going, but then any noise that might be created by the program or is being felt by the program that could influence things either way. And you have got much more of a sort of an outward looking viewpoint. At the project level, you're more sort of inward looking in terms of what are the A, B, and C of what you're looking to do.
Yeah, and on the larger programs, then you often get a kind of a split at the program level, in that you'll have a program manager, but there'll also be a program director. Have you kind of worked in that environment where that you have those two roles at the program level?
Yes. I think particularly on the very large programs, you can have multiple program managers. You can have a technology deployment, and there might be an operating model change. There might be an offshoring piece. There'll be a change management piece. And in sort of the large, global, FTSE 10, FTSE 20, FTSE 50 organizations, each of those work streams is a substantial program in itself. So you are looking for people who can be sort of, I guess, inward looking, for want of a better expression, in terms of making sure that those elements deliver. And in that context, the project director is very much, scanning the environment, looking at the broader sort of context, getting buy-in into the program, because you are, affecting quite a large change. And therefore, who are the people who need to be brought in? Is the program still meeting its objectives? Is it still running to budget? And, taking the pulse of steerco members and making sure that there are people who are maybe advocates, people who aren't, making sure that people are in the right frame of mind so that you can do what you need to do as a program, and being that voice of the program. You do have that split on the larger programs, but you don't always have to have that split, to be honest. If you're looking at a smaller program, you don't necessarily always have to have that split. You can have a program lead, reporting into a sort of sponsor who can be, the group CFO or the CFO's direct report. But the larger programs will have that split, as you indicate.
I think as you go from project to program management to program direction, it's the level of emotional intelligence and influencing and engaging, those types of, capability or skills, competencies, whatever you want to call them, have just become the ramp up significantly, and the ability to deal with large amounts of complexity and process a lot of data. I think there's some of those things that really ramp up as you kind of go up that kind of scale.
Absolutely. I think fundamentally, in terms of what you're looking for from project managers, is a technical capability and a skill set. Program management is much more soft focus, as you're saying. Every organization has a different culture, a different ways of working, and you have to understand the art of program management is learning how to navigate that environment so that you can achieve the change that's required.
Yeah. What you're doing is making a change to the culture of that business.
Yes, and I think that's where the sort of mix of resources is important, and I think where the real benefit is of bringing external people, be it sort of contract, interim, or consultancies, where you can benefit from external experience is people who have been in a variety of environments and understood what has worked, and have formed that role before. Because sometimes in an organization, if you haven't gone through that kind of change before, it is a skill set in its own right. And recruiting externally for it and getting a sort of a consulting partner or recruiting a set of resources with that skill set greatly increases your chance of success, I think.
But working very closely with a senior member of the leadership team of that function that's being transformed, if it's a single function, somebody that's on the payroll that has that real accountability to the program, to the program sponsor, along with the program manager, director.
And I think ideally what you're looking for is someone, if you are a sponsor, someone who can act as a sounding board, who can provide you with a bit of coaching in terms of the transformation piece, so you can reach out, so you can have a sort of an ongoing dialogue with them around what the sponsor needs to be doing, and someone who has got a bit of experience and has seen the good points.
Yeah, and it's a question we, I've asked of many program sponsors is, has anybody ever sat down with you and given you a role profile or a job description for being a program sponsor? And unsurprisingly, the answer generally comes back no. I've yet to find anybody that says, yeah, they did actually. It was really good. So the role of the program manager then really does become that kind of coach to the exec sponsor of the overall transformation. It's an interesting role, that's for sure.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah.
So before we kind of leave off the topic of capability, one of the other areas we've identified as being a success factor is around solution design, and specifically this is where we're asking, we second really great operational people onto a program and say, great news, you're a process owner, you're a work stream lead. You're now accountable and responsible for designing our future state. So you need to design policies, processes, systems, new ways of working, new organization structures, new operating models, and that can be a really big stretch for people. I was just wondering how you found kind of that land in the world of finance. Do people really take to it? Where are the challenges around that?
Yeah, the solution design point, that has sort of changed in recent years, with sort of, for want of a better expression, sort of old school on premise. There's very much sort of a waterfall approach, and you would design everything from the ground up, and that would be across everything. So your sort of core finance processes, your record to report, order to cash, purchase to pay, etc. Whereas in terms of speaking from a technology perspective, where a lot of the vendors, be it Oracle, Workday, SAP, are moving to, where they have sort of pre-built sort of processes and process taxonomies, and you have processes that are configurable. So you don't have to build it from the ground up. You basically configure who does what when and in what order, rather than building it from the ground up. And then increasingly moving to a more agile sort of way of working. And I think it's still relatively, new in terms of finance and HR. But I think in terms of your solution design, you need to sort of differentiate what are the absolute must-haves from the sort of nice-to-haves, so that you can navigate that environment, so that when you are assessing the various options in terms of what's going to meet your requirements, that you're picking the right one. So rather than doing everything from the ground up to the nth degree of detail and producing sort of 500-page blueprint documents which no one's going to read, actually try to condense it down to those key elements and making sure that you're, in an agile sense, making sure that your vendors can meet those requirements is probably a more important lens than saying we need to design everything from the ground up to the nth degree. What's the future state of the organization? What geographies are you going to be in? Speaking from a finance perspective, what are the accounting requirements around those geographies, for example, and then designing for that future state and coming at it from that high level, progressively going into more detail.
So on that detail point, so let's say we're as part of our transformation, we've selected a new cloud ERP solution that's delivered as software as a service. So, at the scoping stage, what level of detail should an organization go to in terms of their design, so their overall solution design, and so key elements of that design, and how detailed should they go before they sign the contract and start putting people into design workshops?
I think you need to be as detailed as you can. First of all, understanding, what processes are in scope, what geographies are in scope, what existing systems are in scope, and I think being absolutely clear on what is must have and what is nice to have. And then, in terms of understanding sort of volumes, integration requirements, all that stuff is absolutely sort of fundamental, because that is how you need to measure each vendor. It's easy to be distracted by the smooth sales pitch, any vendor. Whereas in reality, what you probably have to do is understanding, what is your list of absolute must haves, and be as detailed as you can in terms of those must haves, so that you can get as specific as answers as you can in terms of those issues, so that you can see through some of the sales pattern.
Yes. And from a process standpoint, so in the past on kind of traditional on-premise ERP solutions, you'd kind of design down to a really granular level, down to a kind of work instruction level. Then you'd give that to your system implementation partner and go, we want it exactly like this, please go away and build it. It's that, how for people that are kind of used to that sort of, big on-premise Oracle, SAP, PeopleSoft sort of solution. What are the differences between kind of that approach and the new kind of cloud technology?
The new cloud technologies have an out-of-the-box sort of way of doing things, and I think the sort of mindset is they will have blueprints for each industry. So if you're in sort of retail, or if you're in professional services, or if you're in retail banking, whatever it is, they will have a predefined set of processes. And what you don't need to do is design processes down to level 4 or 5. The approach that you need to take is something a bit different, which is, what is the overall taxonomy of processes? Which processes are you happy to take a pre-configured design, and which processes are specific to your organization that you do have a tailored process. So typically from a finance perspective, where you might see that is, for example, revenue processing. Paying an invoice is paying an invoice. There's a right way and a wrong way, basically. But, revenue processes is an example where, typically that is bespoke to your organization. So you have to understand what your bespoke requirements are versus where you're happy to take something standard. And having that lens is more important than designing everything from the ground up, as you were sort of suggesting.
Yeah, I guess you could waste a lot of time if you're going to take it out of the box and it works the way it works. It's an area that you could perhaps over design. Have you seen that, people kind of going too deep on their design in the scoping phase?
I have seen that, because I think people fall back on tried and trusted ways of doing things, your sort of classic waterfall, and then you get sort of these sort of lovely, well constructed sort of blueprint documents that probably get read once as part of the sign off, and then sort of sit on someone's shelf. You do see it over-engineered. But I think there is a more broader point to be made around sort of agile approach. So, how these solutions typically get deployed is in an agile way. So you will, have an initial set of functionalities and put that out to the business. And then, maybe in further deployments, add more and more and more. The important point in terms of communicating with the business is getting them educated on that's how it's going to be, so that when they get an initial wave of deployment, they're not disappointed and said, oh, well, it only does this, it doesn't do that. You have to communicate and educate the audience that say, okay, we're implementing this cloud thing, and this is what's going to be in the first wave, and be quite specific around what elements you want to add in further stages and when those stages are going to be, so that you're setting the right expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, before we just move on to our final point on business case, Shafique, it would be really interesting just to get your perspective on the target operating model design and how much should be done during the scoping phase before you actually get to that final investment decision, and you start bringing in external suppliers and new technology and all the rest of it. Is there an ideal point you should get to in terms of the granularity of your design before you kind of move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking about sort of target operating model design, and sort of future size and shape of that organization, and particularly if you've got a business case which is predicated on cost reduction, I think you do need to have an idea of what the sort of new run rate of cost is going to be for the new function, based on a sensible set of assumptions around efficiencies, etc., that makes up that business case. And to do that, you do need to do a target operating model design in terms of, what activities are done where, by who, and then looking at things like benchmarking, and making a sensible set of assumptions around any efficiencies that you might want to make. And that should go hand in hand with the business case.
It's one of those key inputs to the business case, obviously, and that's our final topic on our list of 10 kind of critical success factors on the checklist. So, all this has been leading up to putting together a business case that's going to go in front of the exec committee, and decisions made to invest a good few £1 million, dollars, yen, cents, whatever it is. When we think about transformation business cases, are there kind of subtle differences, or are there big differences between a typical investment case that a board would see versus a transformation business case, and what are they?
Yes, I mean, I think it's very important to understand what the business case needs to articulate is the broader objectives of the program. So, if you have a business case that is predicated on cost savings, then typically your sort of preamble to the business case is a context in which you are making the organization more efficient, and therefore the business case will be predicated on cost savings. However, you may well have a business case that is predicated on an organization growing, which I've seen a lot, and therefore your business case isn't necessarily predicated on reducing cost of IT, finance, or HR, or whatever. You are emphasizing some of those qualitative benefits. So you are meeting expanding future needs of the business, and therefore your emphasis on benefits in terms of qualitative benefits versus necessarily sort of hard pounds and payback, for example, might be different. So it's important that you coach the business case in that sort of broader context, because so that it sets the right expectation, and then it's your opportunity to get buy-in into the program more broadly. So it's very important that business case is articulated in the right way.
In terms of the key people that you need to get to as part of getting your case through, how do you kind of go about engaging the right people before you get to that meeting where you ultimately ask for them?
Yeah, so I think every organisation has a different sort of governance process for those business cases, and it's understanding the sort of context in which those decisions are made, and who are the key people who need to be influenced along the way, and getting their feedback in terms of the business case and engaging with them, not super early on, but at the right time in the process. You can say, look, this is a business case, this is the way we're shaping it, here's an idea of cost, here are the benefits that we're proposing, is this something that you can sign up to, and getting those people on side. Because typically, if you've got a CFO or a budget holder who is signing off a business case, they might go to their direct reports and sort of say, and get their advice on whether they think it will fly. And typically you're looking to influence those people in this process. So it's understanding who those people are and bring them on the journey. And I think right at the outset, we were talking about sort of change network and those sort of things. This is part and parcel of that as well.
I wonder if finance transformation business cases get an easier ride because it's finance, or whether they get extra scrutiny. I'm not sure.
I would suggest that they don't. They get a harder ride because they are finance. I mean, there is a broader point around business cases, which is to understand the broader priorities of the business, because you might be focused on doing your transformation, be it in finance, HR, or wherever else, but the business might have different priorities. And actually, it's about, for a sponsor, speaking to their sort of peers and whatever governance forums are out there, and informal conversations around understanding, is there an appetite to do this? Because what you sometimes don't want to do is distract people from their day jobs and spend a lot of time on target operating models and designs and costs and business cases. And then ultimately the business turns around and say, this is not a priority. So I think having those initial conversations is also important as well. If you are a C-suite holder, getting the views of your fellow C-suite members around what you're trying to do, so you can establish, if you're in the top 4 or 5 priorities for the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for your time on this, Shafique. It's been absolutely fascinating. And one of the kind of key takeaways for me is just the more we speak to people in different areas of business transformation, the more the consistencies come out. It's transformation, I think, in my view, is a process. It's something that you can learn how to do. There's no real kind of magic here. It's not easy, but there's definitely a lot of consistency between the different functional areas and how you go about making transformational change happen, which has been fascinating. If you were to kind of leave, our listeners, whether they're a program sponsor or a transformation practitioner, with some kind of key thoughts, what would they be as you kind of reflect on the scoping phase?
In terms of the scoping phase, definitely have a view of the priorities around what you're trying to achieve and have a clear view of those priorities. And also take a sort of holistic view to that transformation. You don't just want technically strong people who know their content. You also need to be able to transition new capabilities into an organization, and a focus around change management and people, and how to get the broader organization working in your favor to achieve your program is important. Around sort of, resources and having the right people, etc. So scanning the environment around the program is important as well.
Thanks so much for that. Hopefully you'll join us again when we have a look at our build checklist, which will be coming out in the hopefully not too distant future. Look forward to speaking to you again.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to speak again. And it's been very interesting. And you're right, there's a lot of commonalities in terms of how you do transformation, be it HR, finance or customer or wherever else. So definitely a ripe topic.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's the aim for another guest will be actually looking at the sales side, the customer, the revenue side of the business. How similar or different are the kind of function, the support functions, if we can call them that, versus the kind of the front office. So I'll be fascinated to see how much of a parallel there will be there. Thanks again. It's been excellent.
Great. Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Underscore, the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit underscore-group.com. You can subscribe to the feed via your favorite podcasting app. You can contribute to the conversation via our WhatsApp group. And if you would like to feature in a future recording, contact us on social media to find out more.